I think the Philadelphia Eagles added at least 2 new starters from the 2025 NFL draft class. I'll tell you what the rest of the rookie roles will be as well, coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Welcome into this Wednesday edition of the show. I'm your host, Louie DiBiase. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $250 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. The Philadelphia Eagles had 10 draft picks, 10 selections in the 2025 NFL draft. So today we're going to talk about rookie roles. What do the Eagles have planned for this 2025 draft class? I do think there are 2 starters at least that are going to come from this class for the 2025 season, and both of them are on defense, and both of them are your top 2 selections. Jihaad Campbell, the linebacker out of Alabama, Andrew Mukuba, the safety out of Texas. I think you can bet on both of them being full-time players in 2025. Now, both players are different, though, when it comes to what it means for them to be a quote-unquote starter. So let's start with the second-round pick. Andrew Mukuba is actually going to be like a full-time player at one position. Andrew Mukuba is going to be, I think, the other starting safety next to Reed Blankenship. Like, I think now that the Eagles invested a second-round pick in a safety for the first time since 2011. So this is the highest investment they've made in a safety in 14 years because they really haven't given anybody a massive extension either. I guess Malcolm Jenkins was a decent-sized free agent signing. Like, yeah, it's crazy, but Andrew Mukuba might be the biggest safety investment they've made since Jaquan Jarrett in 2011. So he is going to be that second deep safety next to Reed Blankenship. Now, I still think, as I said on the show the other day, there's still a role for Sidney Brown heading into 2025, but I think Mukuba now is clearly the favorite to be the starter. He feels like a hand-picked safety for the style of player that Vic Fangio wants in this defense. As I've said many times, he's very reminiscent to the play style of Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. I saw an interesting comparison as well on Eagles Twitter, comparing him to Rodney McLeod as an undersized, rangy, hard-hitting safety. When it comes to his play style, I actually agree with that comparison as well. I think Mukuba has a lot of traits that reminisce to the days of Rodney McLeod and, of course, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, who was just traded this offseason. So Mukuba, his role, I think he's going to be a full-time starting safety in 2025 unless he's just a complete bust, and I just can't foresee that happening. Jihaad Campbell, it's interesting because will he be a quote-unquote starter at any position the majority of the 2025 season? Maybe. Like, if you told me he's an every down inside linebacker next to Zach Bond, would I be surprised? No. If you told me that he ended up emerging as the second most efficient edge rusher opposite Nolan Smith over Jalix Hunt, over Azeez Ojulari, over Joshua Uche, over Bryce Huff if he's still on the team, no, I wouldn't be surprised. But when I say Jihaad Campbell is a starter in 2025, it's more of a snap count perspective than talking about positions. Because as I've mentioned on the show before, I truly think Jihaad Campbell is going to be a do-it-all player. Vic Fangio will start him at one spot in the offseason, probably early on in the year. I imagine it'll be inside linebacker where he played at Alabama, where they need him the most right now because of Nakobe Dean's injury. I think he'll start there. But I do think as the season rolls on, Nakobe Dean gets healthy. We'll see what happens with all these other edge rushers. They're going to use him there as well. So from a snap count perspective, he's going to get starter snaps. Like, he's going to play, I think, over 70% of the snaps. He's going to be on the field the majority of the time. Like, there are not many situations where you're going to say, we don't want Jihaad Campbell on the football field. But I don't want to say, like, he is your weak side starting linebacker. Like, he is your second stand-up inside backer next to Zach Bond, and that's going to be his main role the majority of the year. I think that could happen, but I'm not going to predict that. I'm not going to say that he is your opposite Nolan Smith, your other starting edge rusher that gets the majority of snaps in that rotation. But I do think Jihaad Campbell will get starter snaps the more the year goes on. It might not be right away, but I think it probably will be, because I think he is going to be your second best inside backer next to Zach Bond. I don't think Nakobe Dean will be ready for the season. So rookie roles, I think you have at least 2 starters from this class right away, right from the jump on day one. Jihaad Campbell and Andrew Mukuba, your first 2 picks, I think are going to be starters on this defense to replace a lot of the guys you lost on defense this past offseason. When it comes to the rest of the guys, does anybody else have a chance to be a starter before we talk about the depth pieces? I don't think so. Like Ty Robinson, the defensive tackle, their 3rd pick out of the 4th round. I do think he's going to be a key part of the rotation as a pass rusher in obvious passing situations. 7 sacks last year, had over 40 pressures for Nebraska. I do think he'll rotate through with Moro Ijoma next to Jalen Carter in those obvious passing situations, but the Eagles really like Moro Ijoma. I'm telling you, he kind of had a breakout year last year. I think he's going to take another step up this season as well. And you do have Jordan Davis, who's going to play a lot of snaps, first, second down, obvious running situations. He did have 2 sacks in the NFC title in the Super Bowl. Maybe he does take a leap forward as a pass rusher. If he does, he's going to be a main staple of that rotation. So I think Ty Robinson likely will be that 4th guy. I do think he'll end up playing ahead of Thomas Booker of those 5 defensive tackles that they'll likely have active on the 53-man roster. But I don't really think like he's going to be a full-time snap count player next to Jalen Carter. I actually think the 3rd starter that could come from this class is Drew Kendall, the center/guard out of Boston College. And he played center full-time at Boston College. But the Eagles did, it's funny, it's interesting, they announced him as a center/guard because I think they know he can do both, and they want to see what he can do at right guard. He's 6'4", over 300 pounds, so he does have the size that they might covet now at this position after losing Mekhi Becton, but considering the success Becton had, and I'm not saying Drew Kendall's built like Mekhi Becton. He's not. Becton was built in a lab. I mean, this man is massive, right? But Kendall does have the size. He does have the power that you might want there, but he moves like Jason Kelsey and Cam Jurgens on the 2nd and 3rd level. Not to their level, of course, but when he gets to that area of the field, he is a very fluid athlete, and that's what the Eagles like in their interior alignment, as a center, as a guard. Worst case scenario, I think I'm a really big fan of Kendall. I think he was a steal in the 5th round. I think worst case scenario, he's your primary center backup behind Jurgens, so you don't have to kick Landon Dickerson over from left guard to center like he had to in the NFC Championship game. I think best case scenario, this summer he beats out Tyler Steen and Kenyon Green for that guard spot. It's not like he has to beat out any legit star. I mean, Kendall, yeah, I think he would be the 3rd or 4th guy when it comes to odds to win that job, because you also have to remember Trevor Keegan, who they drafted on day 3 last year out of Michigan, heading into year 2. I'm sure they have high hopes for him as well. I do think Steen is probably the favorite, then Kenyon Green, then it's probably Keegan or Kendall. But I really like Kendall's traits. He just feels like a Philadelphia Eagles offensive lineman. And if you told me day 1 that he's the starting right guard, would I be surprised in the slightest? I really wouldn't. I wouldn't be surprised one bit. So I think if there is a 3rd starter that comes from this class, I think it's Drew Kendall. When it comes to the other players, like I think they're depth pieces. I think there are a lot of backups. There could be some guys that are in a rotation, like Ty Robinson will play. He's going to be in that rotation on the interior of the defensive line. Miles Hinton, the tackle out of Michigan, I think you put him on ice, a ball of clay that Jeff Stoutland can mold. Maybe there's enough room for him on the active 53-man roster. Maybe you stash him away on the practice squad. Just develop those raw traits. I do think he needs some more seasoning. I think, so last year they kept 10 offensive linemen active on the roster. I think right now you have 7 locks, 7 or 8. You've got your starting 5. Let's just say it's Lane Johnson, Tyler Steen, Cam Jurgens, Landon Dickerson, Jordan Mailata, right? Then Kenyon Green is one of your primary backups. So is Darian Kennard. So that's 7 guys. I do think you keep 3 more. I think Drew Kendall's a lock because of that center guard versatility. So that's 8. And then maybe there's 2 spots for Trevor Keegan, Cameron Williams out of Texas, who I think could be a steal of this draft on day 3. A lot of people are saying if he went back to school next year, he could have been a 1st, 2nd, 3rd round pick, like a top 3 round player. Between Cameron Williams, Miles Hinton, and Trevor Keegan, there might be 1 or 2 spots left for those guys, and then you hope that you can stash away another on the practice squad. I think Cameron Williams, though, is someone you want to keep on the roster because I think another team will scoop him from you. So I would want Cameron Williams there and probably put Keegan and Hinton on the practice squad. So overall, I think you're going to have two starters, Campbell and Mukuba, maybe a third, Andrew Kendall. I think Ty Robinson is a big part of the defensive tackle rotation. And then you have some good depth with Miles Hinton, Cameron Williams. Mac McWilliams at corner is going to be a primary slot backup. I think Kyle McCord has a really good chance to beat out DTR as QB3. And then we'll see what happens with Antoine Powell-Ryland. I think he'll battle for that fifth edge spot with Patrick Johnson. I doubt Bryce Huff is here in 2025. So you got 10 players. Howie Roseman said it best after the draft. If you come away with 2 to 4 rotational players, a couple starters, I think that's a win. And I agree with that for sure. All right, guys, coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, I want to get into how this draft class, I like the approach that Howie took, but it does lead to some more risk, some more bust potential with this class. And I'll tell you why coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. All right, today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are here. The first round is actually winding down, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action as we get deeper into the playoffs. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. I love how FanDuel makes betting just so easy, whether you're picking your favorite team to win or diving into player props. They've got everything from three-pointers to steals to assists. FanDuel has so many ways to bet your favorite player props. Plus, after the game tips off, you can even combine live prop bets into a same-game parlay for a chance to win big. So don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. All right, thanks as always for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. So I like Howie Roseman's approach to the 2025 draft class. There was a common theme with this draft. Athleticism, like elite athletic traits, even on day 3, like Small Mondon. Small Mondon, I think we're going with is his name, Small Mondon. Elite range and speed, right? Mac McWilliams, there's another theme with a guy like that. Versatility. Drew Kendall, versatility. Drew Mukuba, Jihaad Campbell, versatility. Being able to help this team at multiple positions. Those are two of the main themes of this draft class. Athleticism, versatility, and I think upside over the floor. They went for traits. They bet on the ceiling and not the floor. And I like that approach when it comes to a weaker draft class like this, that I don't feel like the Eagles were a big fan of this class, because if they were, I feel like they would have been more aggressive and trading up instead of trading down. I think they wanted just more at-bats in a weaker class. Like, we've got 10 picks in a weaker class. Let's see if a couple of these guys stick, and then that's a win. We've got a lot of picks coming up in 2026, 2027. Those are stronger classes. I like that approach. I like having a lot of picks and betting on traits and ceiling and versatility. Like, to me, that is a smart approach for the unique draft that this was. And they can afford to take this approach because their roster is so well set up, both short-term and long-term, that they don't need these picks to hit. Like, it would be really nice if they do hit. You got to replace a lot of depth pieces, some starters on defense. But this team's going to be okay. Like, this roster is very well intact for the short term and for the future. So I think they can take risks. And I like that they did that. Those more raw upside guys, because they don't have to come in right away and take on a big role, I think actually they're set up for success in Philadelphia more than they would be on other teams. Like, the Eagles, I think, can afford to take these kind of players and take a lot of them because they can properly develop these kind of players. They have time to do it. They have the depth of a roster to do it. And they have such good coaching that these are the right people to get the most out of these prospects, to get the ceiling out of these players. Just look at Jeff Stoutland's track record. Look at Vic Fangio's record. Look at the assistant coaches. Look at Christian Parker's track record with DBs. Look at Clint Hurt's track record with defensive linemen on the interior and on the edge. Like, I think this was the correct approach for the Eagles. It was about athleticism. It was about versatility. It was about upside over the floor. And it was about quantity over quality, because they did see this as a weaker class. And Howie has said it even in years past when he collected a lot of draft picks and 2021, 2022, 2023, when the guy's looking at a couple first-round picks, sometimes multiple twos, multiple threes. He said, look, I'd be an egomaniac, a narcissist, to believe that I have as good a chance to hit on these prospects as any other NFL team, considering what an unpredictable world the draft is and how one prospect just seems like he's got everything and it doesn't work. And then this guy seems like he's just not going to work. And then he does. Like, it's such, everybody can have a process and there are certain things that normally do translate well to the NFL, but you truly never know what a guy is going to be from college to the pros. So I like the approach of saying, let's just have more swings at bat. And especially in this class, I like that idea. They said, let's get 10 picks and let's take a bunch of athletes with a bunch of traits. Let's trust our coaches. We can put these guys behind a Super Bowl winning roster and let's get to work. And I think that was the right approach. But I will say that does mean that there is much more bust potential with this 2025 draft class than recent years. Like, I will say I feel a little more uneasy about this class hitting than past years. And like I said, I love what they did. You guys know me. I'm traits over floor every single day. I was dying for a positionless player like Jihaad Campbell on defense. I love that they went with safety in the first 2 rounds because I was not happy they traded away CJ Gardner-Johnson. I did not want them to skimp on the safety position like they have in 2020 and 2021 after Malcolm Jenkins left, 2023. I don't like when they wing it here. I feel like whenever the Eagles are really good, they normally have one legit stud at this position, and that was Gardner-Johnson. So the fact that they brought Mukuba back, I'm happy with. I love the versatility. I love the speed and the upside of the rest of the class. But I don't feel the same as I did about last year's draft class or even 2023 or 2022. I feel like there is a lower floor for these players. Like, I do think there is a world where, hey, Jihaad Campbell, I'm not calling him Isaiah Simmons, but there is a world where he just didn't figure it out at either spot. And he's a solid rotational piece, but he didn't really master his craft. He wasn't able to take on more, do both at a very high level, and he didn't really even perfect one at a high level. I could see that. I don't project it, but I think there's a world where that plays out. Or, Drew Mukuba just can't stay healthy. His play style, he's so physical, but he's got a lighter frame. Like, he's kind of built like a slot cornerback. He's long, but he plays at sometimes under 190 pounds. And then outside of those two, the rest of your draft was all day 3 picks, 4th round and lower. They only had 2 picks in the top 3 rounds. So I think that also just naturally leads to, and the Eagles are great on day 3. They have a really good track record, and with undrafted rookies. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if a UDFA or 2 ends up being a good player for the Eagles, whether it's offense, defense, or special teams. But 2 picks in the top 3 rounds, yeah. I mean, I think just naturally you're set up more to have a higher bust potential. So I like the approach. It's a weaker class in general. That also leads to it being more bust-worthy. But it's also because of some of the players, the style of player they prioritized, the fact that they only had 2 picks in the top 3 rounds. I do think it's a riskier class, but I think the Eagles know that. But like I said, they can afford to take those risks because they have such a deep roster with short-term and long-term talent. And oh no, if this draft class doesn't pan out, guess what, guys? In 2026 and 2027, they're going to have like 20-plus draft picks. So I think this was the right year to just take some swings at the bat. Like, let's go for home runs. Like, there's some years you just got to hit a single or a double, maybe try to hit a triple. For this year, hell, go for it. Go for the home run. I like the approach. It leads to more bust potential, but I love it. That's my kind of move if I'm Howie Roseman, if I'm a general manager in the NFL, especially this year. All right, guys, we'll wrap up the show coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. As I just said, I'm a big fan of this draft class for the Eagles. I love what they did. But what would I have done differently when I was on the clock? What decisions would I have made different or the same as Howie in all 7 rounds? We'll get into that coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. This Wednesday edition of Locked On Eagles is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where the hell did all my money go? Well, between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and you start building your wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much money I was spending on online shopping, like vintage hats, like the one I'm rocking right now, this Randall Cunningham show from CBS 5 from the 1980s. Like, I couldn't stop buying hats like this. Now, I still buy them, but I do budget and smarter, and I do save more thanks to Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKDOWNNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's right. Use the code in all capital letters, LOCKDOWN, LOCKEDON, NFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKDOWNNFL for half off your first year. All right, so I love what Howie Roseman did in the 2025 draft class. It was a weaker class. I love that he went for versatility. I love that he went for upside. He prioritized the ceiling over the floor. He took risks, but they were calculated risks, and he took a lot of risks. Law of averages, 10 draft picks. Odds are 3 to 4 end up panning out, right? That's just, I think, the way it works. And so I love the idea of just throwing a bunch of darts at the wall, seeing what sticks. If none do, or only a couple do, guess what? The roster is still set up in the short term and long term to be a unit in the NFC, to be a top tier Super Bowl contender. And even if this year's draft class doesn't pan out, guess what? Next year, they have a ton of draft picks. 2027, they have a ton of draft picks. So they don't necessarily need this year's class to hit. It would be nice. It would replenish a lot of the depth they lost in free agency this year. It would add a couple key starters on defense. You know, whether it's at edge or linebacker if you're Jihaad Campbell, whether it's at safety if you're Andrew Mukuba, maybe Drew Kendall can end up being the right guard of the future. Maybe Cameron Williams or Miles Hinton can be your long-term right tackle. But if not, I don't think it's a big deal. And I think Howie recognized that was this year's class. It was a unique season, and he adjusted his approach. And I really like that. I think that was the right mindset. I like most of the decisions he made, and I concurred with most of them. However, if I was Howie in those situations, is there anything I would have done a little bit differently? I think there are a few things. I would have probably took the same approach when it comes to the positions he took, but I do think I would have went in a different route with the prospect. And then I do think there were a couple trade downs where I would have said, no, I'm going to stay put here. I have a lot of day 3 picks this year, next year, the year after. I'm going to stick and pick. So what I would have done a little bit different, so I too, like how he did on day 1, I would have tried to trade up into the 20 range. He went for, it sounded like he was talking to Green Bay at 23, Minnesota at 24. Sounded like he was just trying to get in that 20 to 30 range to get Jihaad Campbell. And I love that he was trying to get Campbell. And when they were on the clock at 32, or when they were about to be, I would have made the same move to move up to 31 to guarantee they get Campbell. He was my best player on the board in that situation. When the Chiefs went on the clock, I would have made the same move as Howie, move up 1 spot for Campbell. But when he was trying to trade up into the 20s, it was still for Campbell. They showed the mic'd up video of them on the phone with Jihaad, and they said, we've been trying to get you for an hour. I think Jeffrey Lurie said that, right? So Campbell was their guy when they were trying to move up more than just 1 spot. For me, if I was going to trade up, it would have been for the same kind of player, a versatile pass rusher, a speed rusher off the edge, but it would have been for a different player. You guys know, probably doesn't shock you, it would have been for James Pierce. But like Howie Roseman, it wouldn't have worked out for me either, because when you look at what Atlanta and New York gave up to move up for Jackson Dart and James Pierce in that range, they gave up way too much. I wouldn't have thought it was worth it. Atlanta gave up a future 1 to go get James Pierce. New York gave up, a second-round pick and 2 3s to go get Jackson Dart. So I wasn't going to move up for those players, giving up that compensation. I like the board still, the way it was falling. I would have just stand pat at 32 and took the best player available, or did another move up for a different kind of player with the Chiefs or with Buffalo. So I would have probably took the same approach on day 1. It just would have been for when I was gunning into those 20s range, and it wouldn't have worked out for either of us. But for me, it would have been for James Pierce as the target instead of Jihaad Campbell. But from 32 to 31, I would have made the same move. Campbell would have been my player over like a Donovan Izareku or anybody else that was available, like a Mason Taylor. It would have been for Campbell. Day 2, I love that they took a safety in round 2. That was my position that I wanted them to take in the second round. I'm like, if you go with a pass rusher on day 1, you got to come away with a safety in the second round. I would have picked Kevin Winston Jr. out of Penn State. He was my favorite player in this class. He was my number 2 safety on the board, only behind Malachi Starks. I had him eventually ahead of Nick Emenwari when it was all said and done. I think the Titans got a steal in Winston Jr. in the third round. I would have took him over Andrew Mukuba, but I would have took a safety as well. So the first 2 picks were exactly what I wanted from Howie. I would have made the same decision from a positional standpoint. I wanted a pass rusher, whether it was in the interior or the edge, or for Jihaad Campbell's sake, as a stand-up on the interior. I'm glad they did that. I would have did the same thing, and I would have took a safety in round 2. So the positions, that's exactly what I wanted. Pass rusher, safety. But I would have, for me, it would have been James Pierce and Kevin Winston Jr. if possible instead of Jihaad Campbell and Andrew Mukuba. But I love Campbell. I love Mukuba. They were 2 players atop my board at their positions. So I'm ecstatic. I just would have had a different preference with who my guy at the top of the board would have been. It was very close between Mukuba and Winston. It was very close between Campbell and these other guys. But I just had a slight preference. I leaned a little bit more towards those other guys. The only other thing I would have done a little bit different is at 96 in round 3. I would not have traded down twice. I would have stood pat at 96. I would have took Gunnar Helm, the Texas tight end, or I would have took a versatile lineman like Charles Grant on the offensive line. And they eventually did that on day 3, and I love the 3 prospects they came away with, between Kendall, Hinton, and Williams. But for me, that's the other thing I would have been a little bit in disagreement with Howie over, is trading down twice. I thought Gunnar Helm would have been the perfect tight end 2 behind Dallas Goedert this year. Then he's your long-term starter, or I think he could be like your version of what the Cowboys got in Jake Ferguson a couple years ago out of the 3rd round. Like, not a super traitsy player, but a big frame, can block really well, good hands, tough receiver over the middle of the field on 3rd down in the red zone, can high point the football. That was Gunnar Helm. Yet again, the Tennessee Titans took one of my guys. They stole all my guys. Femi Adejo, Cam Ward, Kevin Winston Jr. I mean, good job. My man, Locked on Titans, Tyler Rowland, tip of the cap. You guys got all the Lou DiBiase, my guys. So, yeah, I mean, basically the only things I would have done different is take a couple players the Titans got on day 2. I wanted Kevin Winston Jr. and Gunnar Helm. But overall, Howie Roseman, I love the approach he took, and I'm very happy with the 2025 draft class. As a whole, I think it was the right approach. Ceiling over floor, a lot of shots, 10 picks, ton of picks in the next couple years, set up roster short-term and long-term. The Philadelphia Eagles are in really good shape. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Thanks so much for making us your first listen each and every day. Thanks as always for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds. We'll see you tomorrow. Fly, Eagles, fly.